Well, there's a brand spanking new fleet of trains coming to our intercity train lines, which travels between Central and beyond the Blue Mountains to the west. But there's a catch. We know this. We've heard about this. New Korean-built trains will be a bit too wide and too long to fit in all of the existing stations and tracks up the mountains. Well, the local MP, Trish Doyle, has been kicking up a fuss over this ever since it was revealed back in October last year. Yesterday, the government finally revealed their plan, and there are some quite extensive works to be made. So here is Trish Doyle. She's the Labor MLA for the Blue Mountains. Oh, just before we go to Trish, I'll go to Trish right now. Hi, Trish.
Good morning, Wendy, and good morning to all your listeners.
Yes, yeah. Well, Transport Minister Andrew Constance, he spoke to our newsroom a little earlier, and he's adamant, that all this work that's got to be done is good for the future for our rail network anyway. And here's a little of what he said.
We have 7 different train sets which currently can't use those tracks because it is out of step with the rest of the rail network, and it's about time that those commuters enjoyed the same standardised rail network that the rest of the community does. We are trying to take a very old network in excess of 100 years and turn it into something which is modern, with greater capacity, so that there's more reliable and frequent services for commuters.
Rightio. I think, yes, in effect, he's saying there, Trish, you're going to have to suffer for the good of the future. This is a future-proofing, if you like, our train tracks. What are your thoughts there?
Well, what we've been trying to do, Wendy, is get an answer out of the Minister and his department for more than 12 months now about what the cost will be, the costs in dollar terms to modifications to our rail network along the Blue Mountains Ridgeline and out west, as you said, and the cost, the inconvenience to the Blue Mountains commuters. And what Andrew Constance has ignored for that time is that these new trains, the new intercity fleet that he's buying from South Korea, don't fit the tracks. And the specifications in the tender document told us that very early on, and he hasn't answered the question about what the costs will be. So, waiting for 2 years when the estimated delivery time was 2019 means that people will suffer. And we just need to get some detail around what that actually means in terms of ripping up and relaying the tracks, reboring tunnels, shaving platforms. There is some inconvenience people will face, and we just need detail around that.
Well, you got some detail yesterday of what was going to happen. The total length of the rail corridor on the mountains is 75 kilometres. Out of that, some 60k worth of rail tracks needs to be ripped up. Platforms on some stations will have to be lengthened, and there will be at least 10 shutdown periods over the next 2 years, some of them up to 2 weeks long, I think. And the new fleet is supposed to be in service by 2019. Tell me what you thought when you saw the extent of those works, Trish.
Well, we always guessed, Wendy, that it was going to be quite extensive. You're talking about biggest, expensive, most time-consuming aspect of trying to fit these new trains to tracks, that rather than looking in the first instance at what it might have cost and in terms of savings if we had have built fit-for-purpose trains here in New South Wales. And what we could do is we could spend that money on easy access upgrades at more stations rather than shaving the platforms to fit trains that don't fit the track. So, yes, I don't disagree that it would be good to look at upgrading the network, but I think that Blue Mountains commuters have really had a bit of a raw deal here in terms of not receiving any answers. The Liberals have refused to put a dollar figure on all of this, because they don't want to admit that it would have been simpler and cheaper to buy trains here from a local manufacturer to a custom design. So I still would like to get a bit more detail about the inconvenience to commuters, because we have almost half of our working community in the mountains, Wendy, that commute out of the mountains to go about their daily work and jobs and, hospital visits. and that's going to mean a lot of inconvenience to our residents.
But a spokesman for Transport to New South Wales said there was a tender process for the trains. It ended up that that this contract was awarded because it ensured taxpayers received the best value for money.
Yes, but what the Department of Transport, what the Minister and his team won't actually answer, Wendy, is what the cost of all these modifications will be. And I would put it to them that it would actually have been cheaper and simpler in the first place for those trains to be made here. It would have meant that those employment opportunities would have been awarded to Australians who have the skills and the capability to build fit-for-purpose trains, rather than trains that are being built in South Korea, which we know from international examples are problematic, and being brought out and then having to modify our network and modify our platforms and modify the old heritage tunnels. That's going to be very interesting, Wendy, is to see what they're going to do and how they're going to explain the way in which the trains will fit through the 10 tunnels between Lithgow and Bell. So they were built, a long time ago, and that part of the project has been pushed off into the never. No plan, no costings, no time frame.
All right, I'm speaking with Trish Doyle. She's the Labor MLA for the Blue Mountains. Can I just get you to hold there for a bit? Trish, Chris Harding from the Australian Railway Historical Society has jumped on the line. G'day, Chris.
Good morning, Wendy.
So you'd like to give us a bit of a historical perspective on these trains, or on the train lines at least?
I can certainly answer some of the questions that have been raised as well. Yeah. The Blue Mountains line, of course, was always part of the country network, and country trains have always been of a certain size. And suburban trains were slightly wider because they needed to move more people. At the time we first had the suburban electric trains, they were the widest trains in the world. Now, it was a bit silly to think that people commuting longer distances would want to sit in things like that where you've got 3x2 seating. So the mountains have always had specially designed trains, as did further out to Gosford as well. There are still trains available that will fit that, what they call loading gauge, without the need for any other major work. And part of the work that will also need to be done for these wider trains is to move the tracks on the curves further apart, because the trains are too wide to pass each other on sharp curves. The Blue Mountains is full of sharp curves and steep grades. Companies in Europe are still manufacturing really classy double-deck trains that will fit the existing loading gauge. The old Commonwealth Engineering, before it closed down, was actually looking at the Swiss system, which would have fitted perfectly. And in fact, the company that manufactured them offered to build a plant in Wollongong at Port Kembla and actually create jobs down there. Yeah. So
we missed out on that, yeah.
We've missed out on that. We've missed out on some really good technology. One thing that has to be done is the wiring over the mountains still dates from 1956, and if it's not treated soon, will fall down of its own accord. So we have an opportunity as well to look at what they're using in Europe, which is a different voltage for the mountains, which works much better for steep grades. But, of course, the cost of putting in that new system and then having trains that will run under both voltages adds a bit to the cost, but won't be as expensive as having to redesign the platforms, widen the tracks, and look at the issue of the 10 tunnels, or the rat holes as they're actually called.
And so, Chris, you would agree with Trish Doyle then that this whole this whole exercise has been poorly executed?
Now, let me say this, Wendy. The views I'm expressing now are not necessarily those of the Australian Railway Historical Society.
Sure. Okay.
I'm just trying to give some background and not be critical of government. I'm just saying that there have been options that may have worked better.
All right. What about Andrew Constance's defence here, saying, well, this work's going to have to be done anyway, and we've got a whole lot of trains that don't fit up there, and if we do this work, then it'll be tickety-boo all the way through, if you like.
Well, of course, the only trains that won't fit up there are the suburban trains. Right now, freight trains, XPTs, rail cars, the current VSETs, all fit up there quite well, and beyond Lithgow, they're going to face that same problem anyhow. One thing I think could be a possibility, which would be an answer to the issue of the 10 tunnels down towards Lithgow, is that they may decide to truncate the service to Mount Victoria, where there are stabling yards and the trains can turn around. The volume of patronage beyond Mount Victoria to Lithgow would probably justify them saying, look, we'll put a bus on to run that extra.
All right. Well, there'll be a bit of an outcry on that one, I guess. Thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Trish. And, what about the idea of putting on a bus service for that part of the track there? Trish, how would your locals view that?
Locals have been commenting for quite some time through our local media, through this medium, chatting on your show, the ABC, Wendy. No, they love their trains. In fact, a lot of people tell me, though they are old, people love travelling on the comfortable old V-sets. And what we have needed is governments to invest in maintenance, in the overcrowding issue, in providing easy access, and keep the V-sets. I mean, there's that view as well. But just picking up on what Chris said, I think that there would have been a simpler, cheaper option if we had have carefully looked at what the specifications in the mountains were. And I'm left with very little confidence about the government's capacity to deliver these new trains to the Blue Mountains as they've promised in 2019. We'll see what happens, Wendy.
All right, we shall indeed. Thank you so much, Trish.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Trish Doyle, a Labor MLA for the Blue Mountains. Yes, well, as someone says, Rob Sitch and team, there's a whole episode here. Buying trains from Korea cheap and then having to rip up the train lines to fit them. Utopia, says Lynn from Hazelbrook in the Blue Mountains, of course.